It is the last day of the Cretaceous. It's springtime. Tyrannosaurs are on the early morning hunt. Pterosaurs are on the wind, the sky echoing with their calls. Herds of herbivorous dinosaurs travel across the continents in search of the next lush paradise for their food. The ocean is filled with large marine reptiles along with familiar faces such as sharks and jellyfish. Birds sing in the trees. Small mammals scurry in the branches. A dromaeosaur pack finishes a hunt and catches their next meal. A young hadrosaur plays too close to the water and is dragged down into it by one of the largest crocodiles to have ever lived. Ceratopsians graze, a few bulls scuffle for dominance. For many of these sights, it is the last time they will ever be seen on Earth. Today, a massive asteroid between 6 to 9 miles wide is going to crash into the Gulf of Mexico. The disaster that follows will wipe out 75% of all species of animal on the Earth, including some of the most famous dinosaurs that ever walked this planet. This spring day, 66 million years ago, will see all of that end in a fiery apocalypse that will leave a world of small, perhaps initially unremarkable animals behind, but will set the stage for everything that will come when the Mesozoic ends. When the sun rises tomorrow, the Cenozoic, the current geological era of the Earth, will begin. In this video, we are going to cover the last stage of the Cretaceous, the dinosaurs and other animals that existed in it, what the climate was like, the KT extinction itself and its cause and effects, the first stage of the Cenozoic, what its climate was like, and the animals that survived the KT that were still hanging out, along with the new arrivals who were starting to make their appearances in the earliest age of the modern geologic era. We are going to look at two very different time periods that came one after the other, and look at what caused such a dramatic change in the life at the time. This is the last stage of the dinosaurs, Chicxulub Impactor, and what happened next. The last age of the Cretaceous saw the climate starting to move in the direction it would be for pretty much the entirety of the Cenozoic. In the Mesozoic, it had been mostly warm, humid, and so on ever since the Triassic, with temperature fluctuations here and there, but overall, very warm and very nice. In the Maastrichtian age, the climate started to change to be more arid, cool, and like the climate we know on Earth today. And it wasn't just the climate that was beginning to move in the direction that we see today. The continents were also moving to or settling in their places that we know them to be in today. Though the Earth and the way everything is laid out was starting to take on a form that we would recognize today for the first time, if you look at how the Earth looked throughout the rest of prehistory, it looks very alien. It wasn't quite there just yet. Some of the continents were closer together than they are now, and some that are separated today were only just starting to, such as Australia breaking away from Antarctica. Pangaea was essentially broken up at this time, and this age was going to be an age of change because the Mesozoic as itself was going to come to its end, and the dinosaurs would go with them, resulting in one of the most dramatic shifts in animal life since the Great Dying in the Permian. The Western Interior Seaway in North America, present in the modern-day United States and Canada, also drained during the Maastrichtian Age, which itself lasted from roughly 70 or so million years ago to 66 million years ago, to that spring day when a massive asteroid crashed into the planet. And of course, the animals on Earth at this time were far from what we see today, with a few exceptions. So let's look at some of the animals that lived at the very end of the Cretaceous. Starting with an up-close look at what is likely the most famous dinosaur of them all, the Tyrannosaurus rex. Let's start with Tyrannosaurus and its purty chompers too. Look at that nightmare fuel. I dare to say this with my Spinosaurus avatar on screen. Is there a more iconic dinosaur than the T-Rex? Yeah, I'm gonna pay for that one later. So, T-Rex, Tyrannosaurus rex, is without a doubt the most well-known dinosaur of at least its genus, of the Tyrannosaurid genus, of that entire family, and I would also argue it's potentially the most well-known dinosaur of all time. And it's also one of only 2 currently recognized Tyrannosaur species. There are other Tyrannosaurids, but as of now, only 2 known Tyrannosaurus species. T-Rex was the type species, and the newly discovered T. macraensis being the second species, though some paleontologists do argue that Tarbosaurus should be considered a member of this genus too. At the moment, though, it is currently not recognized as one, just a close relative. Tyrannosaurus lived until the end of the Cretaceous, 66 million years ago, and with this outdated reconstruction you see on screen, it's a good chance to address the posture of the animal. Tyrannosaurus, well, what you see on screen is not right. Modern studies tell us that the animal stood with its body parallel to the ground, with its tail extended out behind to balance out the weight of the head. To sit down, Tyrannosaurus rex would have settled its weight backwards and rested its weight on either its pubic boot or its pelvis. We're not sure which exactly. T-Rex is also known for its famously small arms, though it has nothing on some other dinosaurs when it comes to small arms, let's be fair. The arms themselves have had a lot of debate as to what their purpose is over the years, from being straight up useless to being used to hold struggling prey, to stabilize and for balance. All kinds of theories, all kinds of ideas have been suggested for the use of the well-known tiny arms of the T-Rex. It is also a well-known fact that T-Rex was a carnivore, as if every depiction ever couldn't tell you that. Another thing about T-Rex that is worth mentioning is, was it feathered? Early and smaller tyrannosaurs were known to have had feathers, and from Eutyrannus, we know larger ones did too. And it has been recently suggested that if T-Rex had feathers, they were limited to the upper side of the body. But it is not known for sure if it was feathered or not, but evidence suggests that it might have been. Alright, I can't spend this whole section on Maastrichtian age animals on just T-Rex. T-Rex will one day get a much deserved and overdue video of its own. I do want to cover other examples of Maastrichtian age animals, just to give you an idea of what all was around at this time. And I'm not just going to cover dinosaurs, but in the interest of time, from here on out, these are going to be much more brief. So let's move on to some of the pterosaurs you would have seen flying in the sky. Alcyone, Hatzegotryx, Quetzalcoatlus, Tetradraco were all examples of pterosaurs you would have seen flying in the sky in this age. Other animals that were present included various ankylosaurs, Leptoceratops, Ogoceratops, of course Triceratops, Tatankaceratops, which I have talked about before, and that one might not have existed. There were also mammals, such as Argentodes, Didelphodon, Gondwanatherium, which actually survived the KT and made it into the Cenozoic, along with Lavonophy. There were also birds, and there were crocodiles too, such as the strangely cute Morenosuchus and the fast and terrifying Capirasuchus. There were also ray-finned fish, including the Raja, which appeared 70 million years ago and is still alive. And there were sharks, which have been around for a long time at this point, and spoiler alert, they're still here. The killer in Jaws was in fact a shark, everyone. And there were also turtles, too. And while we're on that subject, marine reptiles at this time included the iconic plesiosaur, and there were the pliosaurs and the mosasaurs. So as you can see, the end of the Cretaceous was a very biodiverse time. There were lots of faces in the neighborhood. Even if dinosaurs were kind of on the decline, the world was still full of incredible things. Oh, and there were also ticks at this time. The most lovely of all animals. They'd been around for a while, too. The earliest ones popping up roughly 90 million years ago, 20 million years before the Maastrichtian age began, along with bees and wasps and ants, mosquitoes, spiders, and all those other lovely faces that, while not the exact same, would be familiar to the ones that we see almost every day. Now, with all that in mind, keep it in mind. It's going to be on the test, and we'll soon see just how different the animals of the beginning of the Cenozoic were just a few million years later. Now, let's move on to the event that actually ushered in the Cenozoic, the KT Extinction and the Chicxulub Impactor. We knew about this sudden mass extinction long before we knew the cause. It was hard not to notice such a sudden change that occurred in the blink of an eye, at least as far as change goes when it comes to geologic time. It wasn't until the 1970s that we discovered proof of the catalyst for the extinction. The crater was found in the 1970s, but only proven to be an impact crater in the 90s. With the discovery of the impact crater in the Yucatan Peninsula in the 1970s, it was put forth that the source of that crater might have been caused by an asteroid or a comet, which likewise caused the KT mass extinction event at the end of the Cretaceous, which wiped out 75% of animals on Earth. Up to then, no one really agreed on the cause. Everyone had their own idea for the cause. The Chicxulub impact was endorsed by scientists around the world in 2010 when other theories for the cause, such as massive volcanism like the Great Dying, were ruled out. The impact hit with the same force as more than 1 billion Hiroshima atomic bombs, 100 million megatons. It was also in 2010 that the original date of 65 million years ago that we always used to hear about was upped to 66 million years ago. The impact ring, even today, has a well-defined multi-structural ring to it, reaching out nearly 100 miles from the center, with other deformations in the rock extending way out beyond that. Some of its rings and ripples get all the way into Louisiana. It is one of 3 largest impact structures on Earth, and today it is buried 2,000 feet below the surface, but still very well defined. It tells you just how hard this thing hit. The impactor's velocity is theorized to have been 12 miles per second, and the impact would have sent a cloud of hot ash, steam, and dust in all directions. The asteroid also hit so hard that material was thrown clear into space. In fact, it is theorized that there are fragments of dinosaur bones on the moon because of how hard this thing hit. The impact caused sudden and catastrophic effects on the Earth's climate, as you could probably guess. Temperatures dropped globally and food chains collapsed. We'll kind of touch on that in a minute. It also likely caused acid rain to fall across the globe. It was really an apocalypse that the dinosaurs and other animals living at that time had to endure. For up to a decade after the impact, the planet suffered essentially a global nuclear winter, further creating harsh conditions for animals, and it was a decade or longer before sunlight was even seen again. The ash cloud was so thick that it blocked it. In the KT mass extinction itself, everything was hit hard, and we're going to go through all the major groups now and see how they were impacted. First, the one you all probably want to know, the non-avian dinosaurs like T-Rex. Quote, T-Rex anyway, like the one you see on screen now. This art has me concerned for that man, but if I have to live with seeing this, then so do you. Anyway, despite a few theories that currently do not have evidence to support them beyond some circumstantial stuff, that some non-avian dinosaurs might have survived for a while into the Cenozoic, it is accepted that all non-avian dinosaurs were wiped out in the extinction event at the end of the Maastrichtian Age, the very end of the Mesozoic. There is no evidence that even smaller dinosaurs could find suitable shelter that would have allowed them to survive the extinction. And dinosaurs we know were alive at the time, but were wiped out for sure, included Tyrannosaurs, Ankylosaurs, Triceratops, Torosaurus, and, the big ones. Now, I do have to talk about this, and I just touched on it, but this is one of my favorite ideas, and while plausible evidence for it is minor, it's just a cool idea. And that idea is that there were non-avian dinosaurs still alive in the Paleocene. Now, I might do a video on this someday because it's a conversation that warrants the whole video, but there have been fossils found in the Hell Creek Formation that appear to be up to 40,000 years younger than the KPG boundary, as well as a possible hadrosaur femur that was dated to 64 million years ago. However, the consensus for this currently remains that fossils were exposed and then reburied, which does happen. It's called reworked fossils, and that all non-avian dinosaurs were wiped out in the KT extinction. But it is a very cool idea that some have suggested that at least for 1 million or so years into the Cenozoic, that some non-avian dinosaurs might have pulled through. And it's not entirely impossible either, just as far as we know, unlikely. However, do I personally think the idea has water? Yes. Definitely more than some others might think that it does. If some hadrosaurs or even other dinosaurs, probably the smaller ones, survived a few million years after the impact, then they would have been an example of something called a dead clade walking. And again, this is an idea that they survived a short time into the Cenozoic that I think holds more merit than some people give credit for. Just the idea alone that not even one species of non-avian dinosaurs survived, but they all got wiped out at once, that is a big pill when you think about it. Now, I'm just going to leave that there. Consider that a teaser for when I inevitably do a video on that topic. Because there is some interesting fossils of dinosaurs that are dated past the KT extinction. So I'm going to leave that there for now. Now, birds did survive the extinction. That one also shouldn't surprise you. Only a small amount of ground and waterfowl survived the extinction, but they did, leading to all the birds we have today. Crocodiles and their relatives, meanwhile, were able to pull through by just, in some cases, being able to survive for a few years without food, and they were able to get by on the bare minimum when the food chain collapsed after the impact event. Up to 50% of all crocodiliforms at the time survived the extinction, so they did pretty well. Mammals made it through. They had been diversifying up to the end of the Cretaceous, and the extinction did stall that for a while, but then they quickly evolved to fill all the niches that the dinosaurs had left, able to do so now that they were not in the shadow of the dinosaurs anymore. And burrowing or semi-aquatic mammals had an added advantage in the climate catastrophe than some of the others, and less than 1 million years later, mammals started to get bigger, and while most remained small for a while, it was the first step. Pterosaurs, meanwhile, were completely wiped out in the extinction. As for marine reptiles, the mosasaurs, the plesiosaurs, the ichthyosaurs, all of them, they all were wiped out in the KT mass extinction too. Up to 80% of turtles alive at the time survived, though. They did pretty well. Lizards in the same family as the tuatara survived too, and so did most of the amphibian groups. Deep-sea fish, from what we can see, were basically unaffected by the extinction, but ones closer to the surface and along the continental shelves were hit harder. 90% of bony fish survived, though, and most sharks, rays, and fish that make up that family group also made it through just fine. 28 shark families handled it just fine. Plants, however, were hit hard. 57% of plants in North America alone were wiped out. Many types of fungi were also wiped out in the extinction. With the sun being blocked out, photosynthesis was interrupted. Plants died around the world, and when they did, so went the food chain. If you've ever seen The Road, that is probably pretty close to what things looked like after the impact event happened. Add it all up, and 75% of all animal groups alive at the time were wiped out in the extinction. The Earth was left a shadow of its former self, and it would take a long time for those that survived to recover. Aside from the Chicxulub impact, there are also a few other theories on the cause of this extinction, or causes and contributors to the extinction, and we'll cover some of those now, just for the conversation. Aside from the asteroid causing worldwide freezing temperatures for over a decade, other theories include it not being one, but multiple impact events instead, as another crater-like formations have been found and proposed to be in connection to the KT mass extinction, such as the controversial Shiva crater, something else I might do a video on someday because interesting idea, but there's a lot of upset on that one. Another idea is mass volcanism, such as the eruption of the Deacon Traps, which did erupt close to the Mesozoic-Cenozoic boundary, being tied to the idea that the extinction was gradual and not a sudden one, at least not as sudden as we generally seem to think of it as. But mass volcanic eruption on this scale would have also hit plants hard and had similar effects to a big impact event. It would have been The Great Dying 2, Electric Boogaloo. They say sequels are never good as the original, though, and this one only had a 75% rating, while the original Great Dying had a 96%. We also know sea levels fell near the end of the Cretaceous on a larger scale than at any other time in the Mesozoic, so the effects of this is another idea for being a contributing factor for the extinction anyway. Multiple causes, volcanism, marine regression, and so on are all proposed theories, so the impact of the Chicxulub Impactor remains the most popular explanation for the KT mass extinction today, though. With this fiery destruction, though, the Cretaceous, the Mesozoic as a whole, was over. The Cenozoic had begun. By the time everything settled, the Cretaceous, the Mesozoic, the age of the dinosaurs, was over and a distant memory. Earth would never be the same. Now, the skies are clear again, and a calm morning greets the rising sun a few million years later. It is a very different planet. The dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurus are gone, and in their places are seemingly an empty world. Insects chirp, small mammals rustle in the grass, and the earth looks very different than it did in what appears to have been just the blink of an eye in geologic time. The Earth slowly recovered from the hit it took, a hit so powerful, again, that it left rings in the rock as far away as Louisiana, and left the world very different, a shadow of what it once was, with only a few faces pulling through. Some familiar faces to us today, however, pulled through. Again, crocodiles, sharks, snakes, and some that would not be familiar to us also found this new world without the dinosaurs their home. And if some non-avian dinosaurs, such as hadrosaurs, maybe did survive into the Cenozoic for a while, a few thousand years to 1,000,000 to 2,000,000 years, by now they might be gone. So let's take a look at what paleontologists have for sure discovered about Earth generations after the end of the Mesozoic. In the Danian, the dinosaurs that roamed only a short time before were completely gone. And most animals that were around were small. Not many got bigger than, say, a sheep. Save for the bear-sized Ankylogon, a carnivorous mammal. It is also possible that a specific ammonite class might have survived the KT, though that's when it's thought ammonites were wiped out as a whole, but if they did, then this specific one did not make it to the end of the Danian age. The oceans as a whole were more or less the same as they had been in the Maastrichtian age, save for the fact that they were now empty of the large marine reptiles, and what was left was, again, smaller. For the most part, though, the oceans were handling it just fine, and familiar faces such as sharks had moved on like nothing happened. On land, mammals were able to spread out and take over the world. They didn't do it just yet, though. They mostly remained small until about 60 or so million years ago. Then they began to get bigger. In short, mammals, birds, reptiles, and marine animals, they lived in a somewhat empty-looking, healing world that was nothing like what it had once been. The Danian age itself is the earliest of the Paleocene, and since mammals remained small throughout this entire epoch up to the Eocene, their bones rarely fossilized, and it also wasn't a good time for fossil preservation as a whole. Honestly, I wish we had more of a picture of what the Earth was like at this time, but from what I've read, it seems that the fossil record of the Danian is a lot less sparse than the record of the age immediately before it. There isn't much deposition to it. The animals at the time didn't leave enough impact. Everything was deposited, then eroded again. Many animals from this time will be forever lost to time. Our record of the Paleocene is just not as well preserved. In fact, it is nearly non-existent for the Danian, but we do know mammals were diversifying in the world once the dinosaurs they'd lived in the shadows of for millions of years were gone, and they were really setting the stage for what would come next when they took over the world. The oceans also now looked a lot less prehistoric as we typically imagine them, more closely resembling the oceans of today than they had ever before. The climate saw a greenhouse effect once the ash settled from the fiery end of the Cretaceous. The temperatures got humid again, and we did see things stay warm for a while, but as I said, the more arid and cooler climate of today was already on the way at the end of the Maastrichtian age, and it wouldn't be long before it finally arrived. The age of the Danian is not well preserved. The ages after the Danian do become more well preserved, and it isn't too long before some larger faces make their appearance in the fossil record, like Titanoboa, which lived from 60 to 58 million years ago. But fossils of the Danian itself remain few and far between. Still, the world the new faces of the Earth lived in generations after the asteroid impact was very different than it had been in all of the Mesozoic, and it was the beginning of the stage being set for the Earth as we have it today. The Cenozoic had begun. Perhaps one day we will be able to fill in some of the gaps in the fossil record that are lost, but for now, this time period, this fascinating time period, will remain a relatively incomplete chapter of our planet's past. Maybe one day, though, this lost world, this lost chapter of Earth's prehistory, will be uncovered, and we will get an idea of what happened next after the KT extinction and the end of the dinosaurs.